GIT 500, study population and sampling. We've talked a little bit about populations, about study populations. What exactly are study populations? Well, a study population is all the individuals that fit into your defined population. It is very important to define your study population very specifically. For example, if you said your target population for your study is web designers, this would mean all web designers of any age located anywhere in the world. That would be a lot of people. You want to make that study population manageable. So to do that, you should define your population more specifically. An example, the target population for this study is web designers between the ages of 18 and 36 in the state of Colorado. It's still a big population, but it's much easier to manage. So what is a sample then? Well, a sample is a subgroup of your total defined study population. So if you were to say that my study population is going to be all graphic designers in Phoenix, Arizona, let's just guess that there's 150,000 of them. Well, you would not be able to contact and get data from all 150 of them, and you don't really need to. You need to just get a subgroup or a sample of that 150,000, maybe 100, and you can usually, with a sample, extrapolate those results you get from that smaller sample size to the population as a whole. So you get data from 100 graphic designers in Phoenix, and you could more or less say that what your findings for with the data you get from them is going to apply to all 150, more or less. Let's go over some sampling terms so you know what I'm talking about. Again, the study population is the entire group of people that you're studying. So that could be a class, a town, a department at work, a group of people working in a specific industry, like we saw graphic designers. In statistics, the study population is represented by the capital letter N. The sample is a small group or cases from the whole group that you are studying, so a subgroup. When you say something is the sample size, that is the number of people in your study sample, not the whole population, but the sample population. And that is represented by lowercase n in statistics. When you talk about the sampling design or the sampling strategy, that's the way you selected your sample. A sampling unit or element that is each individual person or case in your sample. So you may say I have 50 units. That means you have 50 people in your sample. A sample frame is a list identifying each person, case, etc. You typically don't have a sample frame unless you're tracking people over time. And then sample statistics, those are just the findings based on the information from the people that are in your sample. There are different ways to sample based on quantitative or qualitative research approaches. In quantitative studies, you want to select a sample that is unbiased and represents the whole population that you are studying. In qualitative, you actually sample in a biased manner because you are looking for specific cases or groups of similar people. In quantitative sampling, you're interested in predicting or estimating the prevalence of a phenomenon, a situation, or whatever. The sampling method is to pick a few or a smaller group from a larger group to form the sample. And then from that sample, you can estimate the outcomes for the entire population. Again, you can extrapolate what you find from that smaller group in the sample to the whole population, defined population. This saves time and money because if you were trying to find 150,000 graphic designers, it would take you forever and it would cost you a lot of money. So the larger the sample, however, the more accurate the findings. So you do want to have a good size sample, and it's really one of the disadvantages is it's not actually data from the whole population. It's just extrapolated, or it's an estimate for the whole population from what you found out from the sample. There are two types of sampling. You have random / probability sampling designs, and that just means every person that's in the whole defined population has an equal and independent chance of being selected for the sample. People are not individually being picked. So if you think about the graphic design 150,000 graphic designers in Phoenix, you're not going to go out and say, well, I only need 100, so I'm going to go and find 100 names and ask them to participate. You don't do that. You would send out inquiry for a request for participation, maybe to all the graphic design firms, or maybe you would do it through AIGA or some other professional organization, or maybe you just put it on Facebook, right? So that is very random. You don't know who's going to answer you back and say, yes, I'm going to participate. Then you have non-random, non-probability sampling, and that's when the sampling or the selection of the participants is very subjective. And this is used when you want very specific people to fit what you need, and you don't want it to be random. That's more used in qualitative studies. It's very important, again, to avoid having bias in your sample selection. So try to avoid doing these things. Don't sample non-randomly. Try to sample randomly unless your research project really needs specific people. Don't use a list of people to select participants, because you shouldn't have names, you shouldn't have identifying information. You just want whoever, right, that fits into that population. And then just another way that a bias can be introduced is if some of the sampling population isn't available, or they just don't want to participate. So that may cause a little bit of bias as well. The sample size is important. For quantitative, larger sample is better. It's good to have like a predetermined number of people. So if you say I want to have 50 participants, you get 50 participants. You don't decide, oh, well, maybe I'll do 50. I got 55 people answered. You can do that, but it's probably better if you don't. And then, of course, it's important that the sample is random. For qualitative, it's a little different. You really want quality over quantity. You want enough to reach a saturation point, which I'll talk about here in a second. And then you really just want the sample that provides the best information. So there's very different ways of picking samples. The saturation point just means there's a point in data collection where every new answer just pretty much matches the trend that you were seeing in your data. You're not really getting any new information. That will help you determine the sample size. It also depends on the type of study. If you're it becomes very subjective, and it's more applicable when you're gathering data on a one-to-one basis rather than sending out mass surveys. So if you're doing interviews or observations, that's when a saturation point becomes important, because sometimes you just don't know where to stop. And so you got to just really be paying attention to the data you have coming in and saying, yeah, I'm not seeing anything new now. I think I've hit my saturation point. So do you need a sample? Well, that's a good question. Think about your defined population. If it is small, like a single GIT class or the employees in your department at work, small groups that you can get to so that you can get data for them. If that's the case, you don't need a sample. You can use the whole population. So if you have all the students in GIT 537 in one semester, and there was 20 students in that class, yeah, you don't need a sample. You can probably get to all 20 of those. Well, what if your population is much larger? Say if your population is all ASU online graduate students. Well, a couple of years ago, I don't have really recent information. This is, I think, from 2021. We had about 15,000 ASU online graduate students. Well, it would be very difficult to contact and get data from 15,000 people. But you don't need to. Again, you can have a sample. This is a good instance where you would need to select a sample. Your sample could be much smaller, 75, maybe 100. That would be sufficient. You, for this class, do not need very large sample sizes for the assignments in this course. If you're doing an applied project, it will become more important to have a little bit larger size of a sample. But again, we're not trying to cure cancer or anything in GIT, so huge sample sizes are not required. In this presentation, we talked about defined study populations and what those are, and then types of samples and what samples are really, and when you need samples, how to avoid bias in selecting a sample, and then really what good sample sizes are.